and welcome back to White Board Gematria. I'm your host, Dallas, and let's get to it. Okay, so everyone needs to go to this website. Just go to Google and type in Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development and read this study, whatever they want to call it, that was put out by the Rockefeller Association. We're going to take a look at this today, and you guys are going to have to read it on your own because I can only cover so much of it because it's a large document. But it is very prevalent to what's going on. So as we take a look here, it's the Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development by the Rockefeller Foundation, presented at the Global Business Network. This was in May 2010 to the Global Business Network. And you can see the contents. There's actually a lot of very fascinating and interesting stuff in here. It took a little while to read because it is quite the interesting study. Now we're going to take a quick listen here to Judith Rodin, who is the president of the Rockefeller Foundation at this time, just to get an idea of what this is. One important and novel component of our strategy toolkit is scenario planning, a process of creating narratives about the future based on factors likely to affect a particular set of challenges and opportunities. We believe that scenario planning has great potential for the use of philanthropy to identify unique interventions, simulate and rehearse important decisions that could have profound implications, and highlight previously undiscovered areas of connection and intersection. Most important, by providing a methodological structure that helps us focus on what we don't know instead of what we already do know, scenario planning allows us to achieve impact more effectively. And again, read this whole thing. Like, the whole letters are phenomenal in the way they just openly talk about this. And here in the letter from Peter Schwartz, the co-founder and chairman of the Global Business Network. The Rockefeller Foundation's use of scenario planning to explore technology and international development has been both inspired and ambitious. Throughout my 40-plus year career as a scenario planner, I have worked with many of the world's leading companies, governments, foundations, and not-for-profits, and I know firsthand the power of the approach. Scenario planning is a powerful tool precisely because the future is unpredictable and shaped by many interacting variables. Scenarios enable us to think creatively and rigorously about the different ways these forces may interact, while focusing us to challenge on our own assumptions about what we believe or hope for the future to be. So, this is about scenario planning and a study put forth by the Rockefeller Foundation about future scenarios. Now, when you go through this, they explain all these different steps and considerations they make when they go through this planning, and it's absolutely fascinating. You see the people in on this, the Rand Corporation, just massive mind control. That's basically what Rand is. And then the scenario framework outline is pretty fascinating too, showing how to use the critical uncertainties to drive the probabilities. We got global political and economic alignment. And check out this adaptive capacity. It's very interesting how they manage us. So, this uncertainty refers to the capacity at different levels of society to cope with change and to adapt effectively. This ability to adapt can mean productively managing existing systems and structures to ensure their resilience against external forces, as well as the ability to transform those systems and structures when a changed context means they are no longer suitable. Adaptive capacity is generally associated with higher levels of education in a society, as well as the availability of outlets for those who have educations to further their individual and societal well-beings. High levels of adaptive capacity are typically achieved through the existence of trust in society, the presence and tolerance of novelty and diversity, the strength, variety, and overlap of human institutions, and the free flow of communication of ideas, especially between and across different levels. Example, bottom up and top down. That's right, a very, very interesting way to categorize those who go along with your system, and those who are lower levels of adaptive capacity that emerge in the absence of these characteristics and leave populations particularly vulnerable to disruptive effects of unanticipated shocks. Very interesting. So there's four main sections that they break this up into based upon the strong and the weak and the low and the high. And we're going to take a look at the one that is very pertinent to us at this moment, which is the strong and the low combination of lockstep. And we're talking about the effect being political and economic alignment is strong with low adaptive capability. So when we read this, this is the scenario for lockstep. A world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. It's very interesting because that's exactly what we've been talking about and this upcoming revolution that they want us to have. So, scenario narratives. They're going to give us things like the timeline, short descriptions of what technology trends, initial observations, and a day in the life scenario when they break this down. So we're going to take a look at the lockstep scenario and just kind of what it has to bring to the table. Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. In 2012, the pandemic that the world has been anticipating for years finally hit. Like 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain originating from wild geese was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked across the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months. The majority of them young, healthy adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. The pandemic blanketed the planet. Although disproportionate numbers died in Africa, South Asia, and Central America, where the virus spread like wildfire in the absence of official containment protocols, but even in developed countries, containment was a challenge. The United States' initial policy of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the U.S., but across borders. However, a few countries did fare better, China in particular. The Chinese government quickly impositioned the enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all of its citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. The Chinese government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. After the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spreading of increasingly global problems, from pandemics and transitional terrorism to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. At first, the notion of a more controlled world gained wide acceptance and approval. Citizens willingly gave up some of their sovereignty and their privacy for more paternalistic states in exchange for greater safety and stability. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for the top-down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in the ways they saw fit. In developed countries, this heightened oversight took many forms. Biometric IDs for all citizens, for example, and tighter regulation of key industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests in many developed countries, enforced cooperation with a suite of regulations and agreements slowly but steadily restored both order and, importantly, economic growth. Across the developing world, however, the story was different and much more variability. Top-down authority took different forms in different countries, hinging largely on the capacity, caliber, and intentions of their leaders. In countries with strong and thoughtful leaders, citizens all over economic status and quality of life increased. In India, for example, air quality drastically improved from 2016 when the government outlawed high-emitting vehicles. In Ghana, the introduction of ambitious government programs to improve basic infrastructure and ensure the availability of clean water for all our people led to a sharp decline in waterborne diseases. But more authoritarian leadership worked less well, and in some cases, tragically, in countries run by irresponsible elites who used their increased power to pursue their own interests at the expense of their citizens. So it's a pretty interesting layout that they do talk about with the lockdown, and then they're going to push the lockdown further, and it's going to spread, and even when the pandemic comes to an end, they're going to keep the lockdown protocols on, as we're going to be willing to give up our sovereignty. It's pretty fascinating. You guys got to check out this this whole paper, especially when you want to take a look. Like, they give you timelines of different events. So we'll get a 3-year event and then a 2-year event and so on and so forth. It's just really interesting. Like, they even got how people are going to be given new different social rights and how everything's going to have to follow new legal ways for the world to work. New technologies, scanners using advanced functional magnetic resonant imaging. Technology becomes the norm at airports and other public areas to detect abnormal behavior that may indicate antisocial intent. Like, it's pretty amazing some of the depth of stuff that they get into with this report. And then plus 2 on top of that, there's 3 other scenarios that they're setting this up and moving us into. And when we take a look at them in conjunction to what we just read, knowing that I only read about half of what they did for Lockstep, when we take a look at that, then we take a look at across that hack attack, we get an economically unstable and shock-prone world in which governments weaken, criminals thrive, and dangerous innovations emerge. And below that, an economically suppressed world in which individuals and communities develop localized makeshift solutions to a growing set of problems. And lastly, together, a world in which highly coordinated and successful strategies emerge for addressing both urgent and entrenched worldwide issues. So they're going to take us through the trenches. We're going to start at lock, go to the hack attack, to smart scramble, and go working together. That's the process that looks like we're in the way for. Going from this world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation in growing citizen pushback, so a revolution out of this amount of pressure we're going to be put under. Cleaver together a world in which highly coordinated and successful strategies emerge for addressing both urgent and entrenched worldwide issues, so the whole world now is falling apart. And then we have to come together, being in an economically unstable and shock-prone world in which governments have weakened, the criminals thriving, and dangerous innovations emerge. And everything just starts falling apart, going into mass war, that social cataclysm we've been talking about, Albert Pike's World War III prophecy, and then everything has to come together at the very end for everyone. So we get our synthesis, our antithesis, and right in the middle at the end there, it all coming together. So thesis, antithesis, and then at the end, synthesis. The smart scramble. Or, sorry, everyone coming together. So again, go and read this for yourselves. It's absolutely fascinating. It's the scenarios for the future of technology and international development. Wherever you are, I hope this finds you well. God bless.